The moment that website was registered, the betrayal had already begun. Not in public, not in headlines, not in front of cameras, but behind closed doors in the silent corners of the internet where the real power moves happen before anyone even realizes a game is being played. Because 2 days before the world was told about the birth of Harry and Meghan's daughter, 2 days before the Queen herself even knew the name, someone had already secured the domain for it. Someone had already turned a royal baby's identity into digital real estate. Someone had already converted a family moment into a business asset.
Tom Bower, the legendary royal author, is sharpening his quill for a new edition of his book set to reveal huge secrets inside Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's marriage.
Now, I choose people who don't want to be written about on the whole, whose lives are shrouded in mystery, and they want to hide their secrets, and I just love digging away to find out what they don't want us to. Meghan is a consummate survival actress. You raised this extraordinary beginning of the year when she carved 2025 in the sand. And you know, it's a very, very interesting image that it came out on New Year's Day this year, because the previous weeks had been absolutely turgid and torrid for her. She had been dubbed Duchess Difficult again. There have been allegations of bullying.
Tyrant in high heels.
Meghan herself.
And Meghan herself.
In the months before she met Harry, was setting up paparazzi pictures in London. She now acts as if the paparazzi, literally the devil incarnate.
She begged the paparazzi to photograph her, and they wouldn't. And when they did, she says, "Oh, I don't want to, I'm hurt." And that ridiculous story about how they first met, the whole thing was a tissue of inaccuracies, to be polite.
Because what do you make of that? Because as you know, Harry was always very insistent.
Tom, do you think Harry and Meghan are fast learning what they signed away when they took this Netflix big moolah? And I would say they signed away their credibility and their dignity.
Well, that's our view, but it's not theirs. They need the money, and they need it now more than ever because they've got no other source of income. So I think they're just stuck with the devil now. They're tied to Netflix, they're tied to their book, and all the criticism they're going to take means nothing because that's the only way they can earn their money. But what they need to do is face up to the blackmail that's coming from California and in some way or other undermine Harry's and Meghan's credibility.
That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't excitement. That was preparation. That was calculation. That was infrastructure being quietly built before the emotional announcement ever reached the family. And the question that sent shockwaves through palace corridors wasn't just who registered it, but why it was done before the Queen was even told. Because that single action exposed something far deeper than anyone wanted to admit. It exposed priorities. It exposed strategy. And it exposed the silent shift from royalty to branding. And Tom Bower didn't stumble onto this by accident. He didn't rely on rumors whispered in tabloids or speculation floating across gossip forums. He spent 2 years digging, 2 years talking, 2 years pulling threads that powerful people desperately hoped would stay buried. He spoke to insiders. He spoke to staff. He spoke to people who had watched everything unfold from the inside and who were terrified of speaking publicly.
She actually monetized the Queen's name, and I find that alone is pretty damning of her.
80 people, 80 separate voices, 80 witnesses to a transformation that didn't happen overnight, but happened slowly, deliberately, piece by piece. Because what he uncovered wasn't just controversy. It was a pattern of image construction so precise, so controlled, that even reality itself began bending around it. And then came the most explosive discovery of all, the parts he couldn't publish, the stories so dangerous they had to be erased from the final manuscript entirely.
And even the publishers couldn't quite believe some of the things which I discovered. And one of the big things at that time was sensitivity reading. There was a great fear that she would play the race card.
Because privacy laws didn't protect reputations. They protected secrets. Secrets about connections. Secrets about exclusive social circles. Secrets about elite environments where introductions weren't accidental and opportunities weren't free. These weren't random parties. These were controlled rooms filled with wealth, influence, and doors that only opened for very specific people. And insiders claim Meghan didn't just attend that world, she understood it. She navigated it. She mastered it. But the most chilling part wasn't her past. past. It was how completely it disappeared. Friends vanished. Relationships dissolved. Entire chapters of her life erased like they never existed. Because reinvention wasn't optional. Reinvention was survival. And then came the moment that shattered whatever illusion of innocence remained. The moment Harry called the Queen. Not to ask, not to seek permission, but to announce.
Of course, he knew very well that she was being pimped.
He didn't ask if he could use the name. He told her it was already done. And that name wasn't just any name. It was Lilibet, the Queen's most private nickname. The name only used by her closest family. The name that represented intimacy, trust, and history stretching back decades. And suddenly, it wasn't just a family name anymore. It was a global brand, a headline, a domain name already secured and waiting because the infrastructure had been built before the emotional permission was ever granted. And when questions emerged, when the BBC reported that Harry hadn't asked for permission, legal threats came fast and loud. But something strange happened. The palace stayed silent. No confirmation, no defense, no statement to protect him, just silence. And in royal language, silence speaks louder than denial because permission leaves evidence, permission leaves confirmation, permission leaves clarity. But there was none. And that's when insiders began realizing something terrifying. Harry wasn't thinking like a prince anymore. He was thinking like an asset inside someone else's strategy because Harry had spent his entire life inside an institution where branding wasn't personal. It was controlled, managed, restricted. But Meghan had spent her life building her personal brand piece by piece, understanding how visibility could be converted into influence and influence into power. And suddenly, everything started making sense. Because branding wasn't new to her. Branding was instinct. And the deeper Tom Bower looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Because Harry's isolation didn't begin in California. It began years earlier during a quiet weekend at Sandringham. A weekend that should have been ordinary, familiar, safe. But instead, it became the moment everything changed. His oldest friends were there. Men who had known him since childhood. Men who had stood beside him long before Meghan ever entered his life. But something went wrong. Jokes were made. Comments were exchanged. And Meghan didn't laugh. She confronted them. She challenged them. And suddenly, those lifelong friendships weren't harmless anymore. They were threats. And one by one, they disappeared. Not gradually, not naturally, but completely. Invitations stopped. Calls stopped. Contacts stopped. And when the wedding arrived, the most intimate dinner excluded them entirely. His brother was there. His family was there. But his closest friends were gone. And insiders realized something chilling. Harry hadn't just fallen in love. He had been separated, removed, repositioned, because isolation doesn't feel like isolation when it's disguised as protection. And suddenly, Harry's world became smaller, narrower, controlled. No old friends, no familiar voices, just one perspective shaping everything he saw, everything he believed, everything he trusted. And Tom Bower saw the same pattern repeated again and again. Relationships existed while they were useful. Connections survived while they provided value. But the moment usefulness ended, so did the relationship. Her father, gone. Her first husband, gone. Her old social circles, gone. Because the past wasn't something to remember, it was something to erase. And then came the Oprah interview, the moment that changed global perception forever. 50 million people watching, 50 million people absorbing every word as truth, every claim reshaping reality, every statement rewriting history. But when Tom Bower examined those claims, the timelines didn't align, the details didn't match, and the emotional narrative that captivated the world began unraveling under scrutiny. Because storytelling isn't always about facts, it's about emotional impact. And Meghan understood that better than anyone. Because sympathy is power, victimhood is influence, and perception is reality. And as Tom Bower dug deeper into his research files, he realized something even more disturbing. Everything the public had seen was only the part he was legally allowed to publish. Because what Tom Bower discovered wasn't just a collection of uncomfortable details, it was a blueprint of reinvention so precise that it didn't just reshape Meghan's future, it reshaped Harry's entire existence. And the most unsettling part wasn't what she said publicly, it was what she did quietly. The silent adjustments, the subtle separations, the invisible walls built between Harry and the life he once knew. Because isolation doesn't announce itself. It happens in whispers. It happens in influence. It happens in moments so small they don't feel like turning points. Until suddenly, everything is different. And the palace began noticing it too. Harry, once surrounded by lifelong allies, now stood alone in California. No brother, no childhood friends, no institutional support. Just Meghan and and the world she had built around him. Because dependence isn't created through force, it's created through removal. Remove the familiar, and suddenly the unfamiliar becomes the only stability left. And that's when the Oprah interview became more than an interview. It became a weapon, a global broadcast that redefined Harry's family as villains and Meghan as survivor. 50 million viewers absorbing every word as truth, every pause interpreted as pain, every claim accepted as fact. But when Tom Bauer examined the timeline, something terrifying emerged. The emotional narrative didn't align with documented reality. Details contradicted records, claims unraveled under scrutiny. Because truth doesn't need reinforcement, but narratives do. And Meghan wasn't just sharing feelings, she was constructing perception. Because perception controls sympathy, and sympathy controls power. And while the world watched in emotional shock, behind the scenes, relationships were collapsing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because once accusations enter the public space, they don't disappear. They stain, they isolate, they divide. And suddenly, Harry wasn't just physically distant from his family. He was publicly positioned against them. And Tom Bauer uncovered something even more revealing: the use of Princess Diana's legacy, the jewelry, the symbolism, the visual parallels. Because Meghan didn't just reference Diana, she wore her presence. She recreated her imagery. She positioned herself within the emotional shadow of the most beloved royal figure in modern history. Because Diana wasn't just a person, she was an emotional symbol. And emotional symbols create loyalty. But symbols without substance expose themselves over time. Because Diana's legacy wasn't built through appearances. It was built through sacrifice, through years of service, through authenticity that couldn't be manufactured. And insiders began noticing something unsettling. Meghan wasn't building a legacy, she was borrowing one. And Hollywood noticed too. Because influence only survives while it benefits others. But once influence becomes unpredictable, doors close. The Netflix deals didn't deliver what executives expected. The Spotify partnership collapsed under the weight of unmet expectations. Invitations became fewer. Calls stopped being returned. Because Hollywood operates on momentum, and momentum disappears the moment trust becomes uncertain. And then came the professional fractures. British Vogue, one of the most prestigious publications in the world. Meghan had been given the opportunity of a lifetime. Guest editor, global visibility, ultimate validation. But insiders described the collaboration as impossible. Not collaborative, not cooperative, but controlling. Because she didn't want to contribute. She wanted authority. And when authority wasn't given, the relationship ended. Because control isn't negotiable when control is survival. And Tom Bauer realized something else. Every confrontation ended the same way. Relationships didn't evolve. They terminated. Clean breaks. No reconciliation. No return. Because past connections represented vulnerability. And vulnerability couldn't exist in a carefully constructed narrative. And then came the financial unraveling. Because royalty provided access. Royalty provided relevance. Royalty provided legitimacy. But once separated from the institution, relevance had to survive on its own. And relevance requires public support, industry trust, professional reliability. And slowly, quietly, those foundations began weakening. Because Hollywood doesn't invest in controversy, it invests in stability. And insiders began whispering about desperation, appearances at events she once avoided, visibility in places she previously considered beneath her. Because absence creates curiosity, but overexposure creates scrutiny. And scrutiny exposes inconsistencies. And the most devastating discovery of all wasn't what Tom Bauer published. It was what he couldn't, because his research files contained an entire second book. Stories too dangerous to print. Accounts from insiders who refused to speak publicly. Details protected by privacy laws so strict that publishing them would trigger legal destruction. Because truth isn't always protected by facts. Sometimes it's suppressed by legal consequence. And those suppressed chapters told a deeper story. A story of calculated reinvention, of relationships used as stepping stones, of identity reshaped repeatedly to match opportunity. Because Meghan didn't stumble into power, she engineered proximity to it. And Harry became the final bridge. Because Harry wasn't just a husband, he was access. Access to legitimacy, access to global visibility, access to royalty itself. And once that access was secured, the transformation was irreversible. Because leaving the royal family didn't just separate Harry from his past, it erased it. And now he stood in California, disconnected from everything that once defined him. His family, his role, his identity, because identity isn't just personal, it's institutional. And without the institution, identity becomes uncertain. And Tom Bower realized something chilling. Harry didn't just lose his royal position. He lost his support structure because isolation creates dependence and dependence creates control. And now, as Tom Bower prepares to release his next book, the one containing everything he couldn't publish before, insiders are terrified because the public has only seen fragments, controlled fragments, legal fragments, but the full picture, the full truth remains buried in research files waiting to be exposed, because branding can reshape perception, but it can't erase reality forever, because past relationships leave witnesses, past actions leave patterns, and patterns reveal intent. And Tom Bower's investigation didn't just expose Meghan Markle's past, it exposed the strategy behind her future, because the domain wasn't just a website, it was proof that the business plan had already begun before the Queen even knew the name. Queen even knew the name. Queen even knew the name. Queen even knew...